Hey there, magical experimenters. Taylor Ellwood here, and hopefully this time you can hear me, and I'm not just going to be making, talking to myself. I do enough of that as it is, so I don't really need to be doing more of it. But hopefully you guys can hear me now. Um, well, I guess we'll find out. Um, so here I am. I'm alive. I'm relatively back to myself. This last week I blew up my life. Um, and I didn't just blow up my life, I ended up, of course, impacting some other people's lives as well, which really sucks because it wasn't necessarily a positive thing. And, I thought I would end up talking about magic and responsibility today because I think that people have a tendency in life to all too easily try and pass off responsibility for their actions onto other things. They'll say, well, I did a magical working, and it was the magic that made me do it. Or they'll say, it was X, Y, and Z that happened, and or it was because of this person, or it was because of that, or it was, etc. Well, I hate to burst your bubble here, and if and for the person who's watching, if you can hear, can you like comment and let me know that you can hear or like it or something? Thank you. Um, anyway, I hate to burst your bubble here. At the end of the day, the responsibility for your actions, magical or mundane, is on one person alone, you. So, in my case, I'm responsible for blowing up my life this last week. Now, I can tell you different reasons why. I can point to, this situation happened. Okay, great, thank you, Victoria. Or I can tell you that, you know, other things occurred, and I mean, it's not like I was the only actor in all of this. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, if we are to live our lives with integrity, if we are to live our lives honestly and truthfully with ourselves and with anyone else, we have to be willing to take responsibility for our actions. And so we can't conveniently, it's convenient to fob it off and say, well, for example, I did a magical working and it changed my life in ways I didn't expect, and it's really the magic's fault. Well, no, you did the magical working. You are responsible for that magical working. You're responsible for the results and the consequences. You know, it's a tough thing to say because I think a lot of times people want to not be responsible for the things that go on in their lives. And I could tell you that, I mean, what led up to this week, I could tell you any number of things. I could tell you, for example, that for the last year, I've been burning the midnight oil. I've basically been writing a book a month while working a job I hated and dealing with the trauma of said job because basically, I was getting beat up every day by people that were unhappy about their software for all intents and purposes. I could tell you that all that played a role, or that when suddenly becoming free of that, the starting to unpack the shock and some of the trauma around that, kind of threw me off the rails, even though it was a positive change. I could tell you that, and yes, it would be easy to say, well, this was because of all that. Those are influences, and certainly we should acknowledge the influences that are impacting our life. But it's like somebody saying, well, Mercury went into retrograde, and that's why I'm not communicating effectively. Well, no. Mercury going into retrograde, maybe that's an influence, but at the end of the day, it's on you for why you're not communicating effectively. No one else is forcing you not to communicate. Nothing else is causing you to communicate wrong. It's you. And I think like when we as magicians, but most importantly as people, when we try to pass the buck for the responsibility of our own choices, we're really doing a disservice to ourselves, and we're being disrespectful to the people that our actions affect. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to tell you don't ever do magic or anything else. Don't I mean, we do what we do, and and the changes that we manifest in our lives, they come about, and we have to then navigate them and learn from them and everything else. But we also have to take responsibility for them. We can't pass the buck. And like in my case, I have to take responsibility for some choices that I made recently that were not good choices. And again, I could give you all the reasons why, but at the end of the day, it doesn't much matter what the reasons were for those choices. What matters is that I made those choices. I made those choices. I made the decision to do whatever it is that I did. And those choices had an impact that didn't just affect me. I mean, it'd be great if it only affected me, but it wasn't. It affected other people. And I'm not going to say that those other people didn't take actions of their own, or that they don't have some responsibility of their own for whatever. But the only thing they're responsible for is their actions. They're not responsible for my actions. They're not responsible for my choices. I'm responsible for my choices. And that's what we have to necessarily critically engage in and recognize. Like, you are responsible for your choices. And you can come up with a list of explanations for why those choices have been made. You can say, well, it's because of this trauma. It's because I was unhappy in this way. It's because X, Y, and Z. Yet at the end of the day, you cannot run from your responsibility. You cannot run from the responsibility of making the choices that you've made. You have to own it. You have to accept it. And fortunately, in my case, despite blowing up my life, I was able to get things turned around and figured out. Um, it doesn't mean there aren't consequences. There are, and I'm dealing with those right now. But that's life. I can live with that. It just sucks when you hurt other people. It's not a good feeling. It's pretty crappy. And again, it doesn't change the reality either that each person in any situation has some level of responsibility, only specifically in regards to their own actions. Not because it's like, I'm not going to tell you, oh well, they're responsible. No, they're responsible for their actions. That's it. How liberating in a way it is to hear that, you might think. Well, yes and no. I mean, being responsible for your actions, mundane and magical, is not an easy or liberating thing, because it means that you really are looking at yourself in the mirror and you're saying, this is what I've done. This is the effect it's had. But I think it's important because it's also a step away from being an eternal victim. And as someone who has gone through a fair portion of my life at times being a victim, and still sometimes catches myself with some victim mentality, I can tell you, life doesn't happen to you. Life happens with you. You make choices. You do things. And not all your choices are going to be good. This is why, in the Magical Experiments group, on these videos, in the books that I write, in the classes I teach, this is why I'm so transparent about my own mistakes, about my fallibility. I don't want any of you ever to think of me as some spiritual guru or authority that's got his act together. I don't know anyone who does have their act together entirely, in fact. And someone who presents themselves as such should always be critically examined, and you should be wary of that person, because people are messy. There's no two hands, there's no way around that. People are messy people, and that mess can spill over to affect other people. And again, what can you do about that? Well, I mean, take responsibility, recognize your role. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm recognizing my role and what I did and the choices that I made. And I'm moving forward, because that's what I can do. I can dwell on things, I can feel sorry for myself, I can do all of that stuff, but it's not going to do any good. And if anything, it would just reinforce the victim mentality that would be an evasion of responsibility, an evasion of such things. And this is why, really, like, when people talk about magic, sometimes they talk about it like, well, you know, I did a magical working and then X, Y, and Z happened. And it's like they don't want to own it. Like, I was talking about a few weeks ago about, how magic can ruin your life. Well, magic can ruin your life. But you chose to do that magical working. No one forced you to. Nobody held a gun to your head and said, do this magical working or else. Or if they did, well, I mean, even so, you chose to do it. That might be a little too radical in terms of the responsibility. I don't know, but here's what I do know. The choices you make, magically, mundanely, or whatever else, you still have to own. You do a magical working and your life gets upset, well, you have to own that. You made that choice to do the magical working. You did it for whatever reason, and now you have to deal with it. And is that easy? No. And is it regrettable sometimes? Is it regrettable really any time where it's having a negative impact on other people? You better believe it. But that's where you own it and you move forward and you learn from it. And as I've promised you guys, I'm never going to sugarcoat anything when it comes to magic or life or any of that, because it's just not the way to do things. You either show up and you take responsibility, or you go or you lie to yourself and you tell yourself that you bear no responsibility for whatever happened. Life doesn't work that way for me. I can't pretend and say, well, it wasn't my fault. No, I made choices. I chose to do what I chose to do. Now I have to take responsibility for it. And, you know, that's just the way it is. You you don't get you don't get a get out of jail free card just because things aren't convenient or easy. If anything, it's that's when you have to step up the most, because when things aren't easy and convenient, that's when you have to really own, like, what happened. And you can say, okay, it was because of this person or that or whatever else. And yes, there is. I'm not going to say there isn't some truth to that. A situation can occur where you have experience. Maybe you are dealing with an astrological influence, or something comes up, or whatever else. But at the end of the day, you still have to own your own thing, your end of things. You can't just say, well, it was just because of this or because of that. No, you made a choice. You made a conscious choice. And it could have been because you were reacting to things. It could have been because of other stuff. But you still, at the end of the day, you have to own that. No one else can do that for you. And that's why I think stuff like this has to be said more often when it comes to magical practices and really just to living our lives. Like, you don't get to avoid the consequences of your actions just because you don't like those actions, or just because you don't like yourself as a result of those actions, or whatever else. You just don't. So here I am, and I will tell you guys, I'm relatively okay. I'm getting some additional help, which is good. And I'll be around some. I'm going to be around some this week now, a little bit more, and so on. I'm taking a break from writing about magic for a while. I kind of need a break because I'm just like like, even though I'm happy I wrote the latest book and it's coming out at the Monday of 31st, I'm also feeling like I just need to do something fun, like write some fiction. So I'm gonna go visit with the Zombie Apocalypse Call Center series, and write about that and try and wrap that series up and have some fun with it. But even with all that, I still have to take responsibility. It doesn't go away. So be gentle with yourselves, like, be kind to yourselves, but also don't shy away from being honest with yourselves and taking responsibility for your choices. Life doesn't you don't get a pass because you messed up. That's you clean up your mess as best as possible, and you own your end of things, and you move forward as best you can, and you learn, and you you try to be better. That's where I'm at right now, and yeah, I'm sharing that with you guys because again, I'm never gonna sugarcoat. I'm never gonna present myself to you guys as anything other than what I am. A very fallible, messy person at times who has his act somewhat together, but has also screwed things up too. I am by no means a perfect person. I doubt I ever will be. I think perfect would be boring. But here I am. Take me as I am, and I'll do the same with you. All right, catch you guys later this week for the usual Thursday video. Take care.